I'm hoping this will be a very quick video, just giving you a little bit of an overview of the development of a number of phases in the Holocaust. The Holocaust, or Shoah, is often thought of as having 4 or 3 phases. Probably it's most common for people to consider it as having 3, but I do like the idea of a 4th phase, a phase of liberation. I think that's really interesting, and it covers just the beginning, really, the first 6 months of 1945. You'll also find in quite a lot of books, they don't talk about the first phase, 1933 to 1939. The argument is before the war, it was not a murderous phase of the Holocaust. I think probably the balance of historical thinking now is saying this Holocaust escalates between 1933 and 45. The first phase was very much a time of increasing anti-Semitism, a time that allowed the later phases to take place, and so therefore it needs to be considered as part of the Holocaust. So let's have a brief look at what those 4 phases might be, depending on which historians you're looking at. The first phase, between 1933 and 1938, was the time in which the Jews were increasingly excluded from German society, a time of propaganda which desensitizes the German people to supporting, looking out for, standing up for the Jews amongst their population. A time of violence, yes, and a time of planning within Germany, of thinking about how a Holocaust might play out after a war commenced. Probably the big events of that time frame, if we're thinking about the Holocaust between 33 and 38, would be the anti-Jewish boycott of April 1933, the Nuremberg laws and other laws associated or similar to those laws. Nuremberg laws coming out of the Nuremberg Convention of the Nazi Party and the Great Nuremberg Rally of 1935, and then the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht, in November 1938, not long before the outbreak of war in September 39. Our second phase is again a time of violence. It's a time of segregation, separation and ghettoization of the Jews and others across Nazi-occupied Europe. This phase goes up to the end, roughly, the end of 1941. We start to see a change by the end of 1941. As soon as I put a date on it, it makes it feel like there's just this harsh division. But it's generally considered up until the end of 1941 because there's a very important conference you can see in phase 3 down below, the Wannsee Conference, which takes place in January 1942. This second phase is a time of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units, the order police and others carrying out executions across occupied Europe, particularly in places like Poland, and the development of ghettos, particularly in Eastern Europe. There are certainly concentration camps developing. There is certainly slave labour developing, but it's not really the time yet of the death camps, the extermination camps. That's phase 3. So phase 3, between 1941, the end of 41, January 42, through to 1945. It's interesting, some elements of extermination are happening in the late months of 1941, even before the Wannsee Conference. So there's this blending of phases. It's not like one ends at a nice sharp date. No one woke up in the morning and said it's 1942, therefore we must start phase 3. That's not how it emerged. There is a bit of an argument amongst historians of how the Holocaust did emerge and whether it was intended or almost evolving and made up as it went along and planned versus unintended, unplanned. But as far as we're concerned, there's this developing phases which one grows into another. The final solution is I guess the key theme of phase 3. It's the time of our, I don't want to use the word great in the sense of positive sense, but certainly these large, these famous, infamous, massive, in that sense, great extermination camps, of which there are 6, particularly in the areas of what we would call Poland now. The final phase comes in the final months as Nazi Germany collapses on its various war fronts against the Soviet Union in the east, against the Americans, the British, and the Free French forces that are invading from the west, and allies like Canadians and so on from the west. as these areas are falling increasingly under Allied control, the Germans start withdrawing and a number of death marches take place. The Nazis are trying to bring back some Jews into the area to continue their war efforts as slave labour and so on. The liberation is very much part of these final months. I found this diagram online. It has some problems with it. I actually think their purple line goes in the wrong direction at times, but it graphically captures the main events. So our first phase, from January through till January 33 to November 1938, has got its main themes. And we can see here the propaganda, as I've got in the top left of screen. I've got also a colour image of these massive Nuremberg rallies. We've got propaganda, the first concentration camp starting, Nuremberg rallies culminating in Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, which you can see in this imagery here. The night of broken glass then flows into these later phases where we have bullying, we have humiliation and public violence towards the Jews. We see the building of ghetto walls and we see the executions carried out by the Einsatzgruppen. During this time, we have our first tests of the gas by the end of 1941. We have slave labour camps starting. We start seeing demarcation of the Jews where they start to wear armbands and so on. And this very quickly turns into the final solution period, which I've marked in this sort of plum colour. Okay, the Wannsee Conference takes place, and the imagery that we have now is of the concentration camps, such as these photographs at Auschwitz. Okay, the camp period finally gives way into the liberation of the camps, the freeing of the Jews after a series of death marches. And you can see that I've got a couple of double-headed arrows there because I think our lines are sort of going in the wrong direction on this online. So these are the double-headed arrows I'm referring to. I think if we're looking at our dates here, May 1943, it's quite a jump then to August. Okay, so we've sort of got to play with these angles a little bit here. I think the purple arrow implies it's going that way, and I don't think the designer of this artwork has really picked up on the right ideas. Our blue highlights would indicate the end of the war. I've marked here, by the way, 1939, the start of the war. So look, a flawed diagram, but it does give you a sense of continuation. It does give you some sense of these different phases and how they fit together.